This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Welcome to the Fatigue Fixer podcast. Have you ever wondered why you and most of the women you know seem tired so much of the time? Well, this is the podcast where we explore why. I'm here to help you better understand how your body works, whether we're talking about heavy, painful periods, why you have to pee all the time, or what the heck is happening to your body through perimenopause. And I'm not afraid to shed light on conversations that I feel we need to be having out in the open. Like, why are so many women struggling with irritability and anger, drinking more alcohol, and injecting our faces with Botox and fillers in an attempt to stay young? I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Vadeboncoeur. I'm a naturopathic doctor, mom, fatigue fixer, and loud and outspoken woman who's fascinated by the state of modern women's health and well-being. I know that you, yes, you, are incredible, and I want you to have the energy you need to share your unique gifts with the world because we are in desperate need of more female leadership. So join me for conversations that will help you feel less alone, more informed about all the things that might be draining your energy, and inspired to fix your fatigue and wake up every morning feeling rested and excited for the day ahead. I can't wait to share today's episode with you, so let's get into it. One of the conversations that I have on repeat in my office is about energy management. And one of the common reasons why so many women are tired is that we're really good at giving our energy to other people. But we often struggle with making the time and space for the activities that put energy back in. Today, we're exploring one of the biggest energy takers, caregiving. Whether you're a parent, caregiving for an elderly or ill family member or friend, or maybe you're in a helping profession like healthcare or teaching, today's episode is for you. And I was inspired to have this conversation because so many of the women I know find themselves in the sandwich generation, where they're taking care of both their children and their parents. And I see the toll that being a helper is taking on their physical and mental health. And I've often felt a little stuck in supporting them, besides telling them to try to prioritize self-care, which seems really hard for them to do because of their caregiving role. This is the one where you gave too much, and I'm so excited to speak with our guest today. Amanda Rocheleau is a registered social worker and compassion fatigue specialist based in Ottawa, Ontario. With nearly 20 years of experience in the field and a bachelor's and master's degree in social work from Carleton University, Amanda has developed a deep understanding of the challenges faced by helping professionals within healthcare, social services, education, and public service settings. As the founder of her own private practice, Amanda offers counseling and consulting services to support individuals and organizations in reducing the risk for psychological injuries and burnout. She is a sought-after speaker who's spoken to over 600 professional and conference groups across Canada, and she is the host of the Giving Tree podcast, a podcast for helping professionals who want to build resilience, prevent burnout, and promote well-being. Amanda, welcome to the Fatigue Fixer.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. I was actually listening to your podcast a couple days ago, and you said something that stopped me in my tracks. I literally hit pause on the podcast and I ran over to grab my Post-its and I was like, I need to write this down for the episode. And what you said is this: in order to give, you need to know how to take. And I was like, isn't that just the crux of this whole conversation? Is that so many of us are really good at giving and we're not so good at taking. So is that kind of like the overall thing that you're seeing with caregivers and kind of compassion fatigue?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that phrase really came to me The reason why I named my podcast The Giving Tree was because I had this pivotal moment reading that children's story, The Giving Tree, written by Shel Silverstein, to my kiddo who had brought it home from school because they were learning how to be, generous with their peers and be good friends. And I read that story and I went, holy moly. At the end of it, I realized that I had been I had all these messages around me in my entire childhood and into my adult life that was all about, how amazing it is to be a giving person. And I really adopted those values and saw myself as a giver until I realized in that moment I had given so much and I hadn't been paying attention to how I was replenishing that energy. And I didn't even know how to take. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to say no. I know that for sure. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know what my limits were. So I was constantly crossing them. And it felt genuinely uncomfortable to be in a position to receive care. I was so used to being like the giver, the helper, the shoulder, And I realized I had this flash where I looked at my life and I was like, man, actually anytime. At that point I had 3 kids. And so, you have a lot of people who come into your life at that point they're like, is there anything I can do? And I realized my go-to response was, I'm good. Thanks. Right. And I had realized that in this quest to be independent and in this quest to be, this solid, powerful, empowered woman who can do things on their own, and in this quest to be a generous person, that I had completely neglected my own needs. So yeah, to be a giver, we need to learn how to take. We need to learn how to receive. Yeah.
I think that what you just said about that independent woman piece is so important. That's something I relate to so much. And I remember being so proud to never need help. And even just I can think of so many times where I went and did something where I physically was lifting and putting massive things in my car. And some gentleman or someone would walk by and offer to help. And I was like, no, I'm okay. I got it. I'm strong. And now I make it a practice to ask for help when I need it, or that if it's offered, to say yes, even if I don't 100% need it. Yeah. I think it sends such an important message when we start to practice that ability to receive, because that is so difficult for so many of us. So when you were reading that Giving Tree, and I've never read that story, but I can't get that visual out of my head of that poor little stump that's left at the end because this tree just gave everything she had. I think that's such a perfect visual for how so many of us probably feel. Sadly. How did you know in that moment that your giving had gone too far?
Oh, well, I was in a full-on burnout. I hadn't named it that. I didn't know, but, mentally I wasn't the same person. I actually was giving less and less. I think I spread myself so thin trying to give to everybody that I realized that I was probably only giving 10% here or 5% there. I was physically ill a lot. I went through, so I'm in my, at this point, I had kids pretty young and I had, 3 kids in 4 years. So, it was pretty tight turnarounds there. And so I think just physically, going through pregnancies and breastfeeding and things like that was just a lot on my body. And then returning to work, I worked on the front lines as a social worker. I had a very demanding job that involved a lot of crisis work. And so I was just really burning the stick, at both ends. And at one point I got pneumonia twice in a year, like, walking pneumonia, which I jokingly say is like pneumonia for social workers and moms. It's like
Right.
you just like throw the pnomonia on your back and just like keep going with it.
Of course.
And then I got shingles. So I was probably about 27, 26, 27, maybe not even that. Gosh, I don't even know. And so I got shingles, and that was like a really big wake up call. It was like realizing that me working double time all the time meant that my immune system was as well. And, there was no physical reason, biological reason or, health concern that would allow that, that shingles virus to resurface other than just sheer exhaustion. So but it's amazing because I really do think that I had become desensitized to stress. So, I often say now to clients that, it's like your body starts whispering to you, I'm tired. I need a break. I need something. I need rest. I need hydration. I need to de-stress. And I just got really good at not listening to those whispers. You're tired, you drink more coffee. You're in pain, you pop a Tylenol. Your body's like burning inside, you take antacids. It was like in hindsight, I look back, my body was telling me in so many ways. It wasn't until it got to the point where I was really, really sick. Like one of those times, like I actually thought I was having a heart attack. I went into the hospital.
Oh, wow.
They obviously did tests right away. We're like, okay, you're not having a heart attack, but there's definitely something going on. And I ended up having pericarditis. I ended up having, inflammation around the heart, like all of this stuff. And if you fast forward to later, it was like I wish I could even tell you that those were like, oh my gosh, I need to change my life. But it wasn't.
It wasn't.
No, it was definitely, it made some shifts. And I definitely was like, okay, I need to take care of my body. But it took a little while for me to kind of figure out I needed to take care of my mental health as well. And I needed to change my life. I needed to change how I was approaching my relationships, my work, my energy. And that was really my journey in starting to take and to find boundaries and protect my heart. And, when I literally got that heartache in my body, it was like it took a while for me to figure out that I had heartache in another kind of way that I needed to tend to. So figuring out that mind-body connection and changing my behaviors and changing my decisions was all part of my journey. And it's really why I do what I do now too, because I understand that experience that many women have, many people have. But the truth is that if we take a look at our society, women tend to have this tend to fill the caregiver roles the most. We know that statistically. It's a very obvious statistic. Yeah. They're in the caregiving roles professionally and personally. And I think that we have also internalized a lot of that overgiving and people-pleasing kind of personalities and personal traits. And so that's something that I think I see in common with a lot of my clients. And I always kind of jokingly like raise my hand and say, I'm an overachiever, people pleaser in recovery. Like I'm working on it every day, like, because that's my default is to go into that overextension, overachieving kind of place. And definitely the people pleasing, I'm going to prioritize the needs of other people over my own always. And so always working against that default as well. So that was kind of like, I definitely had to take care of my body, but I had to also then look at the way I was living my life, so I didn't want to end up like looking like that, feeling like that stump for forever with nothing left to give.
Yeah. I think so many of people listening right now can relate to ignoring the whispers. And they often land in my office when their body is screaming and they kind of know I should have been here years ago. I should have done this years ago. What like beliefs or what factors do you think make it so much more likely for women to ignore? Like, why do we do this? Why do we ignore our bodies and just prioritize everyone else over ourselves? What kind of patterns or beliefs do you see contributing to that?
Yeah, so many. The first thing that comes to mind is a phrase that the Nagoski sisters used in their book. You've heard of it, the Burnout, the Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle.
Yes.
Emily and Amelia Nagoski. So they use this term, the human giver syndrome. And this subtle and unconscious adoption of those messages that say, when everybody else is okay, then you can take care of yourself. And that's kind of your mission on this planet, and again, it's this feminist lens, particularly as a woman, that's your mission on this planet is to prioritize others. I think biologically we're a little programmed that way too. Anybody with kids knows that. How many of us have spent time making sure that all the kids are fed, and then at 2:00 you feel a little lightheaded and you're like, why am I feeling this way? And then you realize you haven't eaten yourself. And so I think that there are some things that just happen sort of naturally in the distraction of caregiving. I also see something in my practice a lot that is often referred to as comparative suffering. And it's this idea that I measure my suffering up against somebody else's suffering. And of course, especially with the amount of information that we have access to in this day and age, that if you happen to be an empathetic person, a caregiver, a person who listens to other people and their struggle a lot, then we tend to measure up our own struggle up against other people's. And we think, well, at least I have a home, or at least I have some peace here. At least I have food in the fridge. At least I have coffee.
Yes, thank God there's coffee.
Yeah. And so there is also, in that comparison, there is this minimizing of stress. And that is really, I think, why then it isn't until it gets, quote unquote, bad enough that then they walk into your office and they say, okay, now the pain is bad enough. I give myself permission now to tend to it, because in comparison to others, like I have that story of suffering as well. We also just culturally stink at talking about or doing preventative healthcare work or, wellness. And so culturally, that's not really well promoted as well. We're kind of downstream, problem solvers. Wait until it's a real problem before we intervene. So, we're not always great at sort of creating lifestyles and health plans and wellness plans that reflect sort of prevention of problems and promotion of well-being. So that's something that a kind of a lens that I take with a lot of my clients is we look at coping strategies and preventing illness, essentially, mental and emotional and physical, promoting wellness on all those fronts, and then the resolution strategies so even with your best efforts, you're still going to get sick. You're still going to have stress. You're still going to have things that are going to happen in life. And so how do you resolve that, kind of come back home, as I say, back to baseline? So those are sort of and so a lot of times people may have a few strategies in their toolbox of, dealing with the problems when they get bad enough. But we don't really spend a lot of time talking about investing in our wellness. And I have this saying that I say in my presentations a lot, like if we don't spend the time invest that time in wellness, we spend it all in illness. And I'm like, how much time did I spend in my own life, having to sort of pull the parking brake and just stop everything because I ended up in bed for weeks with shingles and illness and so on. When when really I was like, could I have taken that sick day? I mean, when I finally had to take leave, my doctor was like, you're going to need to, you need bed rest. Do you have some time? And I was like, I haven't taken a sick day in years. So I got him in the bank, and it was like, what is going on there that I would have banked all those days instead of taking them when I needed them? Maybe I could have prevented this. So I don't know. Those are the first things that come to mind. I think it's a multifaceted answer, the why. Why do we delay? But it's a good reflective question for people to ask, right? Why do I put it off until the pain's bad enough?
Yeah. Like, why am I not worthy of just taking the time in the moment instead of waiting for the house to be on fire to be like, oh, something doesn't add up here. I can so relate to your not taking sick days. I used to show up at the office sick all the time because I was so afraid of inconveniencing my patients by having to reschedule them. I would just work through it all the time. And that's a big sign of like how much progress I've made, is that now when I take a sick day, like my office manager used to have to like force me to take a sick day. She's like, I am canceling your day. You cannot be working right now. Yeah. And now I'm like, no, I can just do it myself. Like that's been a big area of growth. And the other thing I've shared recently on Instagram is that I've been in practice for 14 years, and I literally just implemented breaks in my schedule 2 months ago, which is horrifying and embarrassing, but it just goes to show how easy it is to think that you need to like jam every second of your day with things for other people. I always took a lunch break, but I'd see people 7 hours in a row with a 30-minute break, which is not sufficient. Yeah. So one of the things that I think causes so much of this fatigue, in my experience anyways, is how women tend to spread ourselves really, really thin. Yep. And we tend to try to give, like, I always use the analogy of like, you wake up every morning and you've got like a pot of energy, like you've got a reserve. Some days, if you're doing good, that pot's real full. And some days you're waking up and that pot's already pretty empty. And then we take that reserve of energy and we like shoot it in 300 different directions because we feel like we need to be doing all the things. And what I see that doing is, number one, it makes life very unsatisfying because you're not actually directing a lot of energy in any particular direction. So you don't really get the satisfaction of doing anything especially well. Yeah. Then you get to the end of your day, there's not a lot of satisfaction, you're exhausted, and you feel like you got nothing done because you probably made like 5% progress in each of these like 300 different spots. So
I totally agree.
How do we start to maybe like do an inventory of where we're giving our energy and where we're spending our time? Like, how do you guide women who do struggle to say no, who do struggle to set boundaries? Because I know a lot of women listening are going to relate to that. Like, how do we start to do an inventory maybe and look at where we might need or want to start to say no or put boundaries? How do we actually start to do this?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that I think taking stock and doing that inventory is an important practice, but ironically, it requires time and energy, right? Which by the time people need to do it, they're already tapped out.
Totally.
So I used to sort of, tell clients to like, hey, like, why don't you get a notebook and we'll start tracking things like that. And I realized that I was usually stressing people out and almost just asking them too much. And so we started doing it in sessions, like just like, hey, I'm going to ask you a ton of questions and I want you to walk through every day. And so I will start doing the documenting. And so, I'll say, okay, so you started, just think about yesterday, you woke up, tell me step by step. And then they'll often kind of jump over things. So they'll say, well, I got the kids ready and then I went to work. And I'll be like, whoa, back it up. Right. So
that never goes that smoothly. Let's be real. Let's be real.
So I started asking questions. And honestly, it's just in the asking questions, like, on average, how many times do you think somebody asked you a question before 8 a.m.? And they'll think about it and they'll be like, they'll get quiet and they'll be thinking about their morning. And they're like, well, I'm already up to 25, and they didn't even have toast on their plate yet, Yeah. And it's things like that. So I think that the first thing we can do is certainly do like a big inventory. Like, who do you take care of? Okay. Sometimes that's a question. It's like, okay, well, I've got, these kiddos, and I got, as you said, like sandwich generation. So such a growing group of people, right? So I take care of my mother-in-law, and I take care of my mom and my stepdad, and we've got a lot of blended families. We've got usually we don't just have a parent to take care of now. We've got sometimes 4 or 5 here going.
True.
And then I'm a volunteer, and then I'm on the parent committee, and then I'm, and so, do you have pets? Yes, you do. Okay, you care for them as well. And so we start making the list of people that they provide care for. And then we start making a list of the tasks that they do. Are you working full time? And what other things do you do? And so on. And then I start breaking it down. And so I think, even as listeners are tuning into this, it's like maybe it gets you thinking a little bit about, the mental load as well, the emotional load. And it usually doesn't take too much for people to sort of have that aha moment where you realize, and sometimes it's a simple question that I ask is, at what point in the day do you think that you got a chance to first think about your body or what you needed? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like, well, really, it wasn't until the kids were back in bed and it was 9:00. And the problem with that is that you're so energy deprived, that pot of energy that you started off with that maybe was full, maybe wasn't, is so empty by that point. So if that's the first moment that somebody gets to go, oh, okay, what do I need now? How do I decompress? It's too late. You're already in a rest deficit, an energy deficit. And I have this joking kind of saying is like, do you ever feel like you're borrowing energy from tomorrow just to get through today? Right. Yeah. And then it's just like, and then you kind of, if we were in a financial situation like that, that would start to build a lot of stress, right? We would feel that debt piling up. Yeah. And so again, what's interesting is that people know that they're in that energy debt, but we have this capacity to repress that awareness. And that's the connection between this stress, exhaustion, and burnout and compassion fatigue. Because compassion fatigue is when you are, as you said, dividing up all of your energy amongst so many people and places that it's nearly impossible to be able to do. And so you start going, okay, if I'm not going to be able to show up 100%, what part of me am I going to have to check at the door in order to get the job done? Mm. And it's your compassion. It's your emotion. Mm-hmm. You check your self-awareness, you numb your emotions, and you leave it at the door. And then you get the job done. How many times have we brought the kids to the park and played and been like completely checked out? How many times have we showed up with patients or clients and been completely checked out? Been in a team meeting, like not participating, not there, completely checked out. Mm-hmm. I think everybody has. How many people? This is what the listeners are going to totally resonate with. How many of us have left work? Those of you who still have commutes, pulled in your driveway and had no idea how you got there, right? So it's leaving your self-awareness behind, and that's a component of numbing that is what we call self-compassion.
And isn't that also a huge reason why we aren't hearing the whispers? Because we're not in our bodies. We are in autopilot. I must get through this day. I must get X, Y, and Z done. And any message that's coming from below the neck that might interfere with that, we, like you said, we drink it away, scroll it away, numb it away, ignore it. And that information that your body is giving you as you go through the day is so powerful, because your body is, how I see it, like it's trying to guide you in the right direction. So when you go and you enter a space, whether it's a meeting or something you do, and you get that pit in your stomach and you get a headache and you feel anxious, there's really valuable information in that. But most of us are so disconnected that we're not even noticing that. And then we get to the end of the day and we're wondering like, why do I feel like shit? Well, you probably packed your day with activities, like you said, that were not for you. They were for other people. You were not present there for a lot of it. And that is mentally, emotionally, like it's exhausting on all the levels.
Yeah. 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 And yet, there may be some people who are listening who are like, and what am I supposed to do about it?
Right.
Because I still got to take care of the kids and I still got to take care of my mom and I still got to do the job. And so what's going to give? Nothing.
Yeah.
That we look at the demands and we don't know what we can give up. And I think that was definitely the case for myself. And so I think that was the delay between sort of knowing I needed to do something different and doing something different, was because it felt hopeless. I mean, my kids are all teens now, but at the time it was like, well, what am I going to do? Like, despite how much I might even agree with the message that I need to take care of myself, I'm not willing to do that in sacrifice of obviously caring for my kids. And so with that, I think comes some really creative responses to shifting our experiences, even when nothing else outside of us shifts. When everything stays the same, what can we still change? And I think that it's like listening to the body. And maybe if at the end of the day, it's like, okay, yeah, I drank a lot of coffee and yeah, I pushed through a lot of pain and discomfort. But, for 60 seconds, I made a choice to, roll my shoulders back and massage my neck in between a meeting, like to take a break and to take 60 seconds. I've learned that the micro practices, the small things that we do, make a big difference. I use this funny imagery of like, if you went to the dentist tomorrow and the dentist says like, so how's your brushing going, Sarah? And you're like, well, listen, I have a really busy practice and a very demanding life. And I do this podcast and I have all these, and you list off all the things, right? So I'm too busy to brush my teeth, but don't worry, Dak. Every couple weeks or so, I do like a solid 3 hours to try to make up the difference, right?
Right.
And, your dentist would be like, what are you talking about? Stop doing that. That's not the way. That's not the path towards wellness. It's the small micro practices every day put on repeat that hopefully turn into habits that hopefully eventually become embodied as a belief of I am worthy of this small practice that tends to make the biggest difference. And so I think that a lot of us are like, and that's part of the self-care wellness culture out there, right? Is book a day at the spa or like book a vacation, right? And so it's sort of like we're always like holding, banking for, that special big day, and ignoring the tiny little micro moments in our busy, overwhelming lives where we can tend to ourselves just for a moment. And so that might be tending to the body, stretching, hydrating. Oh my gosh, I was like chronically hydrated for years. And I jokingly used to say, I don't have time for that. And I don't have time for drinking water, but I also don't have time for the bathroom breaks.
I was going to say,
I also did not give myself breaks, just like you.
Totally.
Right? It was like a bathroom break in the middle of a packed day was so inconvenient that I was like, it's just easier just not to drink water.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
So
That's
the micro moments, I think, are some of the beginning places that we can start to look at, tending to our needs, tending to our body, increasing self-awareness, like some mindfulness moments, and increasing self-compassion, saying something like, this is a moment of suffering. I acknowledge that. Rubbing your heart and just being with yourself like a good friend would, like you do for so many other people.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And, those are, so a lot of it's, just sort of, shifting perspective a little bit. And then, it's kind of a miracle that kind of happens is because your life shifts in the end. things do change. Sometimes people look for other work that creates more work-life balance. I often use the word harmony instead of balance because I don't think anything ever balances out. I definitely give more to others than to myself, and that's okay. But there is harmony now. There is this, I have this way of tuning in to that feeling like, I either feel whole or I don't sometimes, and giving to others helps make me feel whole. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. It feels good. Mm-hmm. And as you said earlier, there's the opposite of compassion fatigue is compassion satisfaction. So, when we actually start to feel that satisfaction about all the things we're doing, that fuels us as well. It's when we become resentful towards the people that are craving our energy and our time and asking things of us, that then when we accomplish those things, we have no satisfaction, right? Because we feel resentful that we had to do it. So it's lots of little shifting, but I want to acknowledge that not a lot of us are in positions where we can turn our lives upside down and say, okay, new plan, right? Yeah. I'm going to, carve out more time for me. But it's sort of bringing yourself with all of those moments of caregiving instead of leaving yourself behind. We abandon ourselves. Yeah.
One of the small shifts that I've made is literally waiting for my son to get on the bus before I have my first cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. And that way I can sit, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, I sit and I drink my coffee and that's all I'm doing. I'm not drinking it as I'm making a lunch and telling him to put his shoes on and. Yeah. So I love these micro shifts. And I think part of why they're so powerful is that they're planting little seeds to change the narrative that most of us have, that we don't have the time or we don't deserve to take this time for ourselves. And what you said earlier, I think is so important, that we have this idea that if we take time for ourselves, that we're somehow sacrificing the time for our kids. And I think that's such a deeply problematic belief that we have around mothering. I personally, I refuse to do motherhood that way. And I have a lot of privilege and time and all the things that allow me to make that decision. But I just truly believe, no matter what situation we're in, that sacrificing our health is not good for our children.
Yeah.
It just isn't. And I don't know. I mean, I do know where we learned that and why we learned that, but I think it's really important for us to check and to catch those kinds of thoughts, because I know that what is best for my son is for me to be healthy and happy and to have time. And I think we also forget that our kids are watching everything we do. Mm-hmm. And I know I want my child, when he grows up, to be able to take a sick day, to be able to cry when he's upset, to be able to say, I can't do this. And the best way for him to learn that is to watch me and my partner do it. So I actually take this role, this responsibility, on very seriously, that yes, it's important for me to go for my walk. It's important for me and my well-being. But I also am showing my son that even when things are busy, mom and dad and whoever it is, my needs matter as well. And I think that can be really hard. But I think it's really important, not just for us, but for our kids and what they're going to learn about all of this. Because this is why so many of us are such givers, because we watched our moms and our grandmothers and the other women in our lives. We didn't pick this out of thin air.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think, is biological differences for sure, but a lot of it is learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if we want something different for our kids, that we have to show it. We have to show it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a big shift for me too. It was there would be moments where it was Mom, and I would feel myself up and off my chair, and then I would sit back down, right? And then I'd say, well, come over here. First of all, I'm not going to do the whole room to room, yes. I'm going to jump, right? I'm okay, I'm not jumping anymore. And I used to have to I had to retrain myself to resist that urge. So I'd sit back down and then I'd say, come here, and then they'd say, oh, let's say I'm hungry, I'd like a snack. And say, okay, so, first of all, you know what? And even here, here is the shelf that I have prepared with things that you can get for yourself.
Yep.
So you can go and look at that shelf. And if you want something else, then I would be able to help you in 15 minutes after I'm done my cup of coffee, or after I'm done watching this show, or after I've done resting my feet. And that was such, sometimes I wouldn't necessarily feel like I need that time, but I was like, I need to practice this for myself. And I need them to know that when you call my name, I don't jump. And it was like building up that space in between, that to delay the satisfaction of an immediate response so that they can build tolerance for that. The other thing is that like you were saying, as I'm learning these life lessons for myself and practicing, for example, asking myself, what do I need? Or sometimes the better question is, what are my unmet needs? Because what do I need always leads to I need more time, more energy, more money, more a vacation, but what are my unmet needs usually kind of gets at it from a different angle. And a lot of times an unmet need that I have is solitude. I need solitude. I'm around people a lot and I give a lot. And because I'm an empathetic person, when I'm around people, there's this immediate energy sharing that happens that I can't help. And so I need solitude, and so sometimes it's sort of noticing and then asking, what is this feeling telling me? What unmet need might it be connected to? So I started asking my kids those types of questions more, like, what do you need? And a lot of times kids are like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Yep. And so, as they're getting older, I can see that work that I kind of intuitively knew, if I'm going to change, this family needs to change with me. I want this pattern to end here. And I can see them as they're older now being more aware of what they need and asking for it. And it's so now when they ask for help, it's usually of more complex needs. Like, can you listen? Can you talk this out with me? And it's it just feels so good to show up for them in that way, because I know that I'm not showing up as that panicky mother going, how can I help? Well, how can I help? Right? Yeah. They're guiding me in how they can help. And I'm not jumping to conclusions as much as I used to, making assumptions of what my kids need. I'm pausing. It's so much change that happened in my own life. And the payoff is that I'm so much more well in all sorts of ways. But the ripple effects that it starts to have in relationships, at work and family, with friends, I'm much more unapologetically me. Like if I've really hit my limit and I don't have anything left to give, but we had talked about going out for coffee on a Friday night or something like that, I can really be honest now and say, I'm really tapped out. Can we reschedule? And I find that the people who maybe wouldn't have responded very well with that just drifted away in life. And the people who really, really honor those boundaries and appreciate my honesty and don't want me showing up at 25%, would rather reschedule and me show up at 100% later. Exactly. They're still in my life, and I think when we start to think about setting boundaries and doing things differently, we're afraid of what the consequences are going to be with the people around us. But it's learning how to say no and set those boundaries is a wonderful way of putting some of those relationships to the test of which ones are sustainable when we adopt a more sustainable perspective of our own lives as well,
I love that. Well, one of the things I heard you say before is I'm done peopling. And I think a lot of us, especially if you're a mom, I say that to my partner every day. I'm if you heard the word dad, the number of times I hear the word mom in a day, you might have a different energy level. You might have a different level of patience than you do. Right. So
for sure,
I think it is so important to like you said, recognize and acknowledge when you are running on empty, that is okay. And that's just a sign that you've given what you had to give that day. It might be 9 p.m. It might be 9 a.m. It might be somewhere in between. And that it's okay to say no and to set a boundary and to reschedule. And like you said, the people who are your real people, like they will understand. I've actually had people who were so grateful because the other thing we forget is that we're not just modeling this for our kids. If all of us start to say, you know what, I'm not going to burn myself out, I'm not going to overgive, it makes it easier for all of us to also stop doing that, because you're not the one person in your circle who's the one saying no to the bake sale or whatever the case is. So, if we all just practice being a little bit uncomfortable and worrying about upsetting people, but if we all kind of start doing it, I really think it would make such a massive shift for everybody.
Absolutely. I agree.
So as we wrap up, I'd love for you to share this idea of like wholehearted living. I've heard you kind of refer to this. What is wholehearted living, and how can we start to practice or embody that?
Yeah, that's some language that kind of stems from like Buddhist psychology and Pema Chodron, who is an author and a Buddhist who people may know. She wrote a book called Welcoming the Unwelcome, and the subtext was wholehearted living in a brokenhearted world. And I mean, I read those words and I was like, that resonates. And it shifted my thinking away from trying to solve my burnout problem in the doing parts, right? And like, how am I going to restructure my life? and just got me thinking about just being wholehearted, and what does that mean? And so, yeah, as I said earlier, it began there, just asking myself, how am I really doing? And asking myself, what makes me feel whole? What do I enjoy? What are my values? And then how do I live my life in alignment with those values? What are my limits? How do I then honor those limits? How do I take responsibility for my own needs and my own desires and honor them? So that is what I believe wholehearted living is. It's definitely not having a whole life, like a whole, day. Like, I mean, I realize that, and again, I think a lot of folks can relate to having a little bit of an addiction to productivity. This idea that like, I'm only whole once I have got to the end of my to-do list, helped all the people, done all the things, checked all the boxes. So I started this idea of wholehearted living was just about shifting the idea of what makes me whole, and asking people those questions too. I've talked to strangers. I've gone out, for coffee dates, met people like in business and stuff like that. And I, I stopped asking people like, so what do you do for a living, and all that sort of stuff, and being like, so what brings you joy? And what makes you feel whole? What makes you feel complete? And yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation because a lot of us haven't thought about that. And but I just am committed to the idea of thinking about that and asking myself those questions.
Yeah. And I think that asking ourselves those kinds of questions is actually a big part of what allows us to actually start living our life in a way that is satisfying and fulfilling, because I've realized how easy it is to go through all the motions and do all the things that you're kind of expected to do and the things that you think originally will make you happy and bring you joy. And I think so many of us are starting to realize like, well, you know what? I've done all the things. I got the job and the dog and the kids and the house with the fence and the car, and like, what now? Right. And I think when you're starting to feel that resentment, when you're getting to the end of the day and you're exhausted, those are all signs that it's a great time to really check in. And like you said, most of us are not going to flip our whole lives upside down, but it literally could be as simple as drinking your coffee and not doing anything else. Yeah. Or one of the examples I use is like going pee when you get the urge, like literally just starting to tune into these most simple and basic things that our body is trying to tell us, and just paying more attention and noticing, because I think those are the ways that we're going to learn to make these little like energy deposits throughout the day that are going to keep our cup a little bit fuller. And then starting to learn potentially where we are overgiving, or where our giving is not at all aligned with our values, and we're just doing it because we've been doing it or someone else told us we should do it. So Amanda, I really want to thank you for this conversation. I know I can think of so many patients, like in particular, who are in this situation. And I really hope that this conversation is giving them some food for thought. And certainly I encourage you, if you want to learn more about this, go check out Amanda's website and her podcast, The Giving Tree. It's a really wonderful set of resources for helpers and caregivers of all kinds. And I think this is just something that is going to become more and more of an issue as our population continues to age. So anyways, I really want to thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye. Thanks for spending your precious time with me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean so much to me if you would take a moment to leave us a rating and review, and share this episode with a friend who needs to hear it. If you're ready to get more insight into what's making you tired, find out which of the 5 most common types of fatigue you're dealing with by taking my fatigue fingerprint quiz at fatiguefixer.ca/quiz. Are you dealing with frazzled fatigue, where your body's exhausted but your brain won't shut up? Or maybe you're more of the drained fatigue type, where no matter how much sleep you get, you struggle to get up in the morning. Just take my fatigue fingerprint quiz and you'll have more insight into which labs to ask your doctor for, and what habits and practices are best for fixing your type of fatigue. Find the quiz at fatiguefixer.ca/quiz. Because let's face it, accepting perpetual exhaustion as the norm, that's just not going to fly around here. Last but not least, I want to thank Jen Hudson and Mike Trutler over at Story Studio Network for bringing these conversations to life. I'll see you right back here in 2 weeks. Bye.